Hi, I'm Rice Anglang, and welcome to the first episode of our Make Photo Art podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking to well-known photographer and artist Michael Bilotta. Here we go, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Michael, thank you for joining the Hangout.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My first hangout on Google.
Great. How would you characterize the art and work that you do?
It is a hard thing to categorize. We all want to categorize, and I guess I use three things in my tags when I post photos. I use surreal, conceptual, fine art photography, but I never like the term fine art photography because it sounds arrogant.
Oh, okay.
Like what I produce is fine art. I know what it means, but so I think it's photo manipulation with intent. How's that?
Photo manipulation with intent. I like that. I like that. How did you originally get into your art? Like, what's the story behind that?
The shortest story would be when I was a kid, I wanted to be a filmmaker. Filmmaking was an impossible dream because there was no digital photography, there was no digital filmmaking, and it was, something that you could aspire to, but there was no practical way you could learn it on your own. So I got the music bug in my teens and decided I have to become a singer-songwriter, which I did, and I went to school for music. And right around the time where it was getting old for me, the whole music thing, and I really didn't like the music business, digital photography came along, and I decided to kind of revisit visual stuff and kind of pick up where I left off. I used to draw. I used to want to be a graphic artist, and so it was kind of like just picking up the camera, and the first thing I did was make special effects, lightsabers, all that good stuff. And so that was 14 years ago, and I've been sort of learning photography on my own for 14 years. I think it took me several years of trying to learn the very basic mechanics of photography, like ISO versus aperture versus, before I realized and remembered that I could do art with it. I mean, I was just focusing on the technical for so many years. I tried portraiture, I tried landscape, I tried macro, and really it just didn't really mean anything to me other than a technical. It wasn't very creatively satisfying. So about 3.5 years ago or 3 years ago, I decided to try and make it artistic. And since 2000, I've been playing with Photoshop anyway. So those two things were up and running, and I just connected them, I guess.
Got it. So you've been doing it for 3 years total now? Is that?
As far as art photography or whatever we called it, 3 years. So
okay.
I'm kind of new. I'm the oldest new person on the block.
Awesome. So you said you were self-taught, right, with photography, and in terms of Photoshop. How does that work exactly? You just experiment with what you're creating, or?
Yeah, I mean, it looked terrible at first, like everybody does. But the day I got Photoshop, which I think was 1999, 2000.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, the day I got it, I called in sick from my day job for 2 days and was obsessed with it from day one. And I'm sure there's things I've learned online and picked up, especially as online grew, because don't forget we're talking 2000. So, but I was kind of playing with video and photography, and I was using After Effects and Photoshop, and video just became frustrating because with photography, especially this kind of photography, you can do an epic. You can do a big statement with one photograph, and you can pull out all the stops. With video, you're very much limited to a level of amateur, and then huge money has to be spent to do what you really want to do. So like you're always limited by angle. You're always limited by special effects and what you can do with your camera. And so I think I just became really disillusioned with video and just focused on the photography for the last 3 or 4 years.
Got
So
it.
yeah, and as far as self-taught goes, I think I've been playing with lighting for about 6 years.
Okay.
So I got a really rudimentary light kit at first, and Joel Grimes, I don't know if you know that name. He's a celebrity photographer, fashion photographer.
Yeah.
He was like my lighting hero for a long time.
Oh wow.
Um, he did a whole book with side lighting with speed lights.
Okay.
He basically did a book of desert scenery, all using artificial light that he took with him. And I actually have some light kits at home that I don't enjoy using. I actually prefer using speed lights. So
Really?
yeah, for about 3 years now, I've been using 3 Canon speed lights with giant diffusers, and I just like having no cords and no cables to trip over. I have a small space at home that I shoot in. Could take these lights anywhere. The drawback is I can't see what I'm doing. There's no modeling lights. But I kind of have my settings down now where I know what I'm going to do. I move the lights around, sure, but I pretty much have it down to a little bit of a personal science now.
Can you talk a little bit more about your studio setup and how you like to set up your lights?
Yeah, I don't shoot in the outdoors ever. I shoot my scenery outside, of course, but everything starts with a modeling session. Everything is shot with medium gray seamless, a
Okay.
little darker than your background right now.
Yeah.
9-foot roll, and I put it floor to ceiling with a slight curve. The curve gives me a sense of the horizon line or the
Mhm.
floor line. And I bring models in, and we have no idea what we're going to shoot. Because anytime I plan anything, it never works. So I bring a model in, sometimes some props, and I just have them basically be an actor. I don't want, the face. I don't want the modeling pose. I tell them not to even look at the camera. Don't look at me at all. And I want them to give me emotions. Cry to heaven, look angry, jump up and down, address something over there, address something over here. I don't know what we're going to do with it, so I just try and get about 400 shots. So in terms of gear, I use a Canon Mark II, 5D Mark II, which I got about 2 years ago. Finally went full frame, which was incredibly expensive for me. But, when you start on this path, you become gear obsessed a little bit. I use a 50 and an 85 millimeter prime lens, not L glass. I wish I could, but I don't have L glass money. I use a 1.4 and a 1.8, 50 and 85 millimeter. I have a 24, but I don't use that very often. I have 3 Canon speed lights, and I have a 6-foot octabox on one of them, and a 5-foot thin softbox on another. And I have, I believe, an 18-inch beauty dish. And
Got
that's
it.
it. So the lights, I'll side light. I'll do a key light on one side, almost to the side of the model, slightly in front and to the side. I'll do a fill on the opposite side. Occasionally I'll use all 3, but it's usually a 2-light setup where I'm basically illuminating the backdrop and illuminating the model separately, and the backdrop light actually fills in a little bit for the model as well. It's a small space, so I'm very limited to angles. So, sometimes, like once I rented a space where I could make the paper higher and I could maybe try some angles, but I haven't had a lot of luck shooting outside of my home. So it's kind of my lucky little basement.
So, how do you find the models that you work with? Is there any particular resource that you use, or are they just folks you know?
It was hard. I shot my first model 3 years ago. So before that, I worked with some people at a portrait session. And the difference, of course, a portrait session, someone's paying you for portraits of themselves, which means they're the boss. And I really didn't enjoy the portrait session experience because it's just like anything. It's just like web design. It's like anything else. Everyone assumes they know how to do everything. So in other words, you're going to hire a world famous chef, and you're going to tell that chef how to cook when he's doing your dinner? No. So that's been always the cutoff with me, was when I try to be a professional photographer and make a go of that. These people don't have the years I put in, and they're telling me how to take their own picture. So I started getting models from Model Mayhem. Model Mayhem is a little too model-y for me, and I didn't know that at first. I didn't know what I was needing. I wanted to do nude models at first. I think it's because when you start doing art photography, you automatically have this phase. I think everybody has a phase of nudity where they want to do fine art nudes. So I started looking for that, and then realized quickly there are nude models, and then there are people that think they might want to pose nude, and and everything in between. So I didn't have a lot of luck with Model Mayhem, and I actually started looking around online for life models, people that pose in classes. The first man I used was a 60-year-old man who's a professional life model. All he does every day for his job is pose for classes. So automatically he's comfortable with nudity. Because a lot of models have a lot of restrictions and a lot of demands. And I'm sure, most male photographers will experience the fear on the other end, and it's justified fear. You're putting an ad asking for someone to pose naked in your house.
Right.
Yeah, and most people think that there's something suspicious with that. So when you amp up the age to my age, they're really thinking something's up. I've worked with maybe 12 models so far, 2 women, and the rest were male. And all of them have done portions of the sessions clothed and unclothed.
Okay, and then once you find your models, do you continue to work with those same models, or do you ever try to venture out and find new models for your new work?
I find working with new models terrifying. It's just, you don't know what you're getting. You don't know what the interplay is going to be. I've found about 4 or 5 models that I've used more than once. One of them I've used 5 times. One of them I've used 4 times. Another one I've used twice and plan on using again. And it's a chemistry thing. Some models were great, but I never want to work with them again because it was unpleasant.
Interesting.
Yeah. And also, I think I'm trying to put some personal experience and personal point of view into the photography, into the imagery. And it's getting harder for me to do that with a female model because I don't have those experiences. In other words, I'm looking for someone to stand in for me, I suppose.
Okay.
Like what Woody Allen does with his films. He'll find an actor like John Cusack who'll play the Woody Allen part. Mm-hmm. And I guess some people, like a younger male can be a version of myself, that I'm thinking of younger themes. So my age or slightly older can be my own fears of mortality or aging. So I'm looking for kind of connectivity and also someone who's sort of with a lot of expression in their face. A lot of models take great pains on neutralizing their expression, or they have to, sort of like Zoolander, the film,
Right.
And so the model face isn't going to fly, and a lot of these models that I've used that are either amateur or professional have had to be actors more than they ever thought they might have and some of them are great at it. So I love the people I use. Fresh faces are always great as far as getting some new energy in your work,
Hmm.
but it's also scary because you don't know how it's going to go.
So do you prefer to work with actors and actresses then? Because I'm finding the same thing when I work with actors and actresses. I feel like I get more emotion from their faces, as opposed to, let's say, somebody that just does pure modeling.
Yeah, I think that's a direction I want to go in. There is a difficulty there too. If you want to do nudity, um, a lot of actors will not, upon pain of death, do nudity. I've learned that by putting advertisements for actors specifically or actresses, um, and I think it's an industry thing for them. They're taught to never cross that line. So there is that issue too. But I have worked with a model recently who's actually an actor first and foremost, and he gave me so much stuff, so much character, and really that's going to help shape everything. I've also worked with some beautiful looking people that have absolutely no emotional range in their face. So they're beautiful to look at, but there's no story there. There's no emotion. So there's a problem there, and I think actors and actresses are going to be a better fit for me or someone that does something like I do.
Got it. So I wanted to ask you about the storytelling elements and the themes that you use in the works that you create. So you mentioned before that you don't really go into a shoot with a definite story, but you tell the model or actor to sort of become a character. Now, is that something you develop before the shoot, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, this is one of the reasons I use, and this is one of the reasons I use black suits a lot. Black suits are neutral. They're non-clothing. They're timeless. They have no context because a black suit has been around since what, the 17th, 18th century maybe, and it hasn't changed all that much. Nudity is timeless because we're all naked. So that gives me a blank canvas to figure out stuff later. Sometimes the model's pose or expression, a play of light on their face, will give me an idea later. Almost never do I have a preconceived notion of what this is going to be. For example, I did a shoot once where I was planning on using a prop, and I don't remember what the prop was, but I didn't get it. I didn't get the prop I needed. And the model's coming in about 3 hours, and I was desperate for something for him to hold, something for him to do something with. So I bought a bunch of red balloons, and I had no idea why or what I was going to do with it. And that turned into a series because he was a very young man, and red balloons are kind of beyond the Magritte, the Rene Magritte reference that they are by nature. It's a symbol of innocence. And so this whole series developed around loss of innocence. And I used those red balloons for this little string of a young man going through some stuff. And that came about all after the fact and by accident. So now it's literally just, let me shoot a model, let me see what he looks like or she looks like, let me see what they can do, let's try some angles. Occasionally I'll say to myself, I don't want anyone laying on the floor this session. I'm so sick of that pose. I don't want everything to be this side all the time. So in my head I'll have a notebook of, make sure you get an upward angle, make sure you shoot low to the ground, make sure you have walking, make sure you put, all the things that you feel like you're lacking in basic poses, just to keep the variety going. So that's about the only preparation I do now, which is we'll see how it goes and see what happens. It's terrifying
Got
because
it.
sometimes no ideas come.
So, in terms of lighting, do you always have in mind where the light source is gonna come from at the end of the work that you're creating? Like, is that something that you keep in mind, or Do you keep it constant throughout the shoot? Because I realize that the works that you create have really beautiful dynamic lighting.
And it's all kind of very based on limitation. I do have a small space with a 6-foot giant octobox. So that alone doesn't allow me to move it very often.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'll generally light from that side, or occasionally I'll move it to the other side of the room. And that by nature, the only other place I can light is the other side. One of the things that Joel Grimes taught me, it's a very basic lighting principle, I guess, but I just learned it a few years ago, was the larger your light source and the
Hmm.
closer it is to your model, you're going to get some beautiful soft wraparound light. You'd think the opposite is true. Like a giant light right in your model's face is going to be harsh, but it actually is quite soft. So I get that thing as close as I can. I side light a little more distantly for fill. And then every session, I bring out the beast, which is this awful beauty dish. I love it. It's my favorite light. It's gorgeous light, but it's an overhead. And I use it generally not like most photographers will put it right above their camera, facing sort of at a slight angle down into the model's face, and they'll use a reflector under the chin sort of to bounce it back.
Hmm.
I use it directly overhead, sort of like an interrogation light. Where were you on the night of? And it casts this gorgeous ethereal pool of light. And it's a cheap beauty dish I got from Amazon using a speed light. And I have to throw a white t-shirt on the top so it doesn't have any accidental spill. And it takes a lot of controlling, and because the ceiling is very low, I generally have my models kind of in a sad, pitiful pose or sitting down, um, looking up often, otherwise their face is in shadow. And that's very limiting, but that light is magic every time. And
Right.
it's just a one light situation. I throw a little bit on the background to fill it up. I always need that gray paper visible. So once in a while, I'll try something new. Like this last session I did, I wanted hard shadows. I wanted to play with shadows. That was really hard because I've never done it before, and it didn't really work out too well.
Got it.
So I'm still learning.
Got it. How long are your shoots typically? Let's say you're working with a model. Does it go for just an hour? Is it
3 hours.
3 hours?
Um,
Okay.
yeah, we come in, we talk a little bit. We usually start off with the clothing portion, um, and we'll take a little pause, a little break. I'll recharge the batteries, or I'll replace the batteries. I use all rechargeable batteries, and and then we'll do the nude portion, and that's kind of it. I get about 400 shots to play with, and I get maybe 12 shots usable from every session. In other words, they're all repetition. This is a portion of this model kneeling down, and I'll shoot 30 shots of that in various angles. And if I use one, then the rest of them are kind of pointless because I've already done that.
What would you say is different about your process as an artist from a typical photographer?
Well, I mean, there's a genre called fine art photography, creative photography. I'm well aware of the big players in it. I know all the names, and I do follow the trends. Um, a lot of them are natural light photographers, which is part of the story, but where a lot of them are going to go out into the woods and shoot a concept. That means that you have to know exactly what you're shooting. You have to know exactly what is going to be needed for props, and you're at the mercy of weather. And all of those things I find intolerable because I don't want to be at the mercy of lighting. And being in New England, unlike California, I have no idea if I book a session a month in advance what the weather is going to be that day, and I don't know if I can shoot outdoors or not.
Right.
So I don't like having a knowledge of what I'm going to shoot. It's a lot of pressure, and then in your mind's eye, your vision of what you're going to achieve is always going to be less than what you can do because you've built it up in your head as this perfect thing. and then all these things happen like weather and lighting, and it's too unpredictable. I as much as it makes me nervous, I prefer working with no plan. So that's the difference, I think, between a lot of them is they shoot natural light only, outdoors, pre-planned. And I've been to a couple of workshops where that's happened.
How about in terms of challenges? Do you feel like you faced a lot of challenges to get to where you are? What were those challenges, and how did you possibly deal with those?
Um, well, the first challenge I think I encountered was the big issue with nudity and posting stuff online. I mean, I don't do anything gratuitous. I don't do anything sexual, and I consider what I do artistic, but there is still a giant hang up in this country on nudity. So I've had to modify a little bit of how I shoot. If I want these things shared, if I want people to see my work, I have to be careful about how I shoot. And that's very frustrating. It seems like a bad idea. No one should dictate your art. But it's not dictating so much because if I put a body part in that is considered sexual and it takes focus away from the concept, then it doesn't help me either. So I basically regard the human body as a canvas, and it's a vulnerability thing, the nudity. And I don't find any problem with it. I'm shocked that other people do. So there's that challenge. There's also a lot of people doing this now. I mean, it's a strange genre because not everyone knows about it. Most photographers don't care about fine art photography at all. They consider it substandard. But within the genre of fine art photography, there are tons of people coming up now. All of them are copying each other. A lot of them are copying each other. I did too at first. I mean, it is a way to learn. It's just like learning, if you're learning an instrument, you start playing covers first. You start learning other people's songs first because that's how you learn. But if you have it in you to be a songwriter, of telling your own stories, you quickly get dissatisfied with that and try and find out who the heck you are within what you're doing. And I think a lot of people aren't there yet. You're on Facebook, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have any of these circles on Facebook in your feed, like photography circles and places that post work, you'll see trends coming and going. Like when I did red balloons, I had no idea how many people were doing red balloons. And I was like, oh my God, everybody's doing red balloons.
Right.
Never touch that again.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have you seen a take on Ophelia, the Shakespearean character of the woman who drowned herself in a lake or a river? The tragic character of a woman manipulated by men and drowns herself. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a damsel in distress in the water dead with flowers. Enough already. Enough.
Is that where that came from? That's funny. I went to an art show last night, and the majority of the exhibit was that concept.
Yeah, it's Hamlet, it's Ophelia, and everybody does it. Or everyone holds lanterns. Right. You know, Brooke Shaden does it 4 years ago, and now everyone's holding a lantern and running like something's chasing them. I get it. I understand why. But I really think that you need to just close yourself off from influence after a while and focus on your own cliches. Create your own cliches within yourself. Like, even if you come across a prop that everyone's using, as long as you don't know that they're using it, it's still yours. And I think you have to stop copying at some point. And so when everyone's copying and everyone's trying to emulate each other, it becomes very difficult to stand out in this genre. So that's been a challenge, is sticking your head out and getting noticed. For example, there's Flickr. There's 500px. And there's other sites too. But so 500px will do showcases on people. They'll do features on someone who's reached the top of the page. And it's very statistics based. Flickr will do Explore, and they'll feature someone on Explore. I've been on Flickr for 7 years. I've had almost 2 million hits.
Wow.
And not once have I ever been explored. Not once. So I've seen people that are terrible. And I'm sorry to say, I've seen some terrible things being explored and featured, and I don't know what the secret is to that. And it used to make me crazy. How do I get to the top of this pile? How do I compete? On something like 500px, you have to inundate that page with new photos, new images constantly to start getting ahead. And when you produce one a week, like I do, if that, there's no way you're going to compete with a portrait photographer. There's no way. So at some point, you just have to say, why am I doing this? And do it for yourself. And it's frustrating, but one of my heroes, one of my biggest heroes, is a woman named Maggie Taylor. Do you know Maggie?
Yeah, they show some of her work in Laguna Beach. I went to this gallery, and I believe I bought her book. She uses old photos, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Now she's like me, except that she uses old photos and I use models. We're kind of in the same realm where it's heavy photo manipulation. She has no following on Facebook, hardly at all. She's like not even on the radar as far as photographers go. But she's a success not only in her own right and in my eyes, but she actually makes a living doing this.
Right.
I don't know how that happens, but I know that she's not working and sweating and obsessing over social media, so I'm kind of not doing that anymore because it's frustrating. And I spent a year trying to increase my exposure on social media, and I just don't want to play the game that you need to play to do it, where I produce dozens and dozens of images all looking the same, with the content designed to interact with your audience. To me, my audience is there if they want to see something, if they're interested in what I write, great. But I'm not going to pander and beg you to like my page, because there's no point to it. I mean, you're a drop in the ocean at that point, you know?
Right. So how do you make a living through
Ugh.
art photography? How does that work? You sell mostly prints, or?
I do not make my living doing this. It's only been 3 years, so I haven't really learned everything there is to learn. I haven't arrived yet. I was doing terrible day jobs right up until a year ago. And it was sheer defiance and force of will that kept me saying, I cannot just do this for a living and go to bed and go home and go to bed. So I've kept the art alive after hours, on weekends, for my entire life. And last year, I was laid off from a job that I hated, so no big loss there. Mm-hmm. And I was unemployed for a year. And it was a great year for me because I could pretend that I was a full-time artist for a long time. But in that year, I signed up with 2 image houses that sell your images for book covers, magazines, and such. So there's an avenue there, but it hasn't yielded much. I sell some of my images to musicians that are doing a recording, like a CD. I sold some to a magazine independently, but these are just random drips and drabs. Prints have not gone well. It depends on who you listen to. The print industry's dead. Nobody's buying prints. That's sad to me because they're beautiful in print. You know, I found it personally thrilling to see my prints done well finally, and I spent 6 months looking for a good print house that would, you know, that would work with you personally, that you could get to know, and then recognize your needs, and you know. So I did produce some prints, and they are available, but I've done a book, a self-published book. Um, I think what it is just the audience is a lot of peers. A lot of peers that want to learn how you do what you do because they want to do the same thing. So I think the trick is attracting an art appreciation audience versus another artist, fellow artists. Um, so in other words, I might love this person's work. I might love your work. I might love Joel Grimes' work, but I'm not going to want to buy it because I'm focused on my art. We're all a bit egotistical. All artists are. So we're all focused on our own thing, and the conversation is, look what I did. Yeah, but look what I did. That's great. Look what I did. And so so you need someone that is there for the art and not for the learning. So that's the trick. I don't have the answer to that yet. A gallery show would be a dream come true, but there are realities to a gallery show that nobody tells you about. Like you have to fund it yourself, and it's thousands and thousands of dollars in frames and prints, and you might not sell any. So I'm a little leery of that. I would love to do the workshop circuit. I see people like Adrian Sommerling, Brooke Shaden, other artists that do creative and fine art photography are getting into the workshop circuit, going around the world doing workshops. I feel like I have a lot to teach as far as technique and process and post-processing goes, but it's sort of like everything else. You need to be famous in a sense to get the audience to come to those things. So how do you get famous if you're not out there, and how do you get out there if you're not famous? It's a bit of a pickle, and I haven't figured it out yet.
It's kind of a catch-22.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you make that breakthrough?
But you know what? When you get frustrated with the how, and I don't know how, take a pause and just focus on your art and just keep producing things. You've got nothing else going on anyway. You may as well just focus on what's actually important. Because if there ever comes a time when you're doing a gallery show and you're busy with that, or you're touring the workshop circuit, you're not going to have time to create anything. So to me, I would be better time spent working on the creative part of it.
Got it. That's interesting. How, this is sort of going back to what you said previously about making prints. How big do you like to make your prints, and is that dependent on the technology that you use, or like the printer, like how good your printer is, or how does that work?
I don't use my own printer. I think printing is an art form in itself. To be a good printer, you have to know what you're doing, and I don't want to be a jack of all trades in that regard. So I worked with a local house here in this area, and basically, I've done tests on how big can I get this image, how big of a print can I go. So I generally produce like 8x8, 16x16, 20x20, 30x30, 40x40. And that's as far as I think they'll go in terms of quality without losing a lot of resolution. So I shoot raw for everything. I do crop square, so I am limiting my length in that regard. But I think 40x40 is acceptable for a good resolution on a full frame camera. I think that's fine. 8x8s look great, but 16x16 looks pretty good too. I haven't really tested the full range, but when you start looking at printers, you can actually have a print house do a strip test, which is ask them to run this at 40x40 in a strip. So you can get a swatch of your image at 40x40 resolution and see what it's going to look like.
Do you think it's dependent on megapixels at all, or is it just shooting in the raw format?
This is one of the things I realized early on. When I started putting collage, montage, photo manipulation, whatever you want to call it, when I first started doing that, I was getting my textures, I was getting my backgrounds, all that stuff from online, from stock stuff. And which is fine. It's just, here's the caution with that. if I'm shooting raw with no loss on a decent camera, and I was using a Rebel for years, so it wasn't a top quality camera, the clip art that I'm getting online is always going to be different resolution, lesser resolution. It could be shot badly at an ISO of 1600. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's never going to match as well as what you're shooting. So about 2 years ago, I just said, you know what? Everything I shoot, no matter how limiting it is, has to come from my camera. And I'm not saying that anyone that doesn't do that is wrong. I'm just saying, for me, I know that the quality will be consistent, and I'm using the same lens, the same gear. So I know that all the pixels in that shot are going to be as high resolution as I can get them. So I don't have to worry about a really bad texture that I threw on a person's skin looking terrible because it was low resolution to begin with.
Got it. I wanted to ask you, who would you say are your influences for your art? Like, where do you find inspiration? Any particular books or movies or music? That I realize that you're also a musician, right? I've seen that in your blogs, so I'm assuming that you enjoy certain kinds of music and that inspires you somehow.
I mean, we'll talk about the obvious one first, and I think you share this one too, whether you realize it or not. I think your own work and mine is definitely influenced by the great Rene Magritte.
Yes, definitely.
And here's the thing about Rene Magritte and his followers. It is okay to emulate someone as great as Rene Magritte. What's not okay is copying him. And the difference is this. Rene has a certain way of using a visual language, metaphor, irony, and where he places a bird in front of someone's face. It's not the bird and the face that's important. It's what it means. So at some point, his language became more of an influence of mine than his literal visual images. Sure, I've used red balloons, so has he. Do I use a lot of bowler-hatted men? Sure. But here's the thing. I liked bowler-hatted men long before I knew who Rene Magritte was, because his influence was in things that I became influenced by before I even knew what the original source was. I also love that time period. I hate our time period now. In terms of fashion, like, you have a great coat on. I love your coat. Okay?
Thanks.
And but I don't want to see that in a photo. I don't want to see modern fashions and jeans in a photo. I just don't. And if I had my money, if I had all the money in the world, everyone would look like 1910. Everyone would look like turn of the century Victorian era clothing.
That's awesome.
I just think it's cooler. The hats, we don't wear hats very often in our society anymore, and I miss hats, and they look great at camera. So that time period, yes, it's definitely Rene Magritte, but it's also my taste. And it's not just because I'm trying to copy Rene Magritte. I'm trying to copy how he approaches things more than his literal images. So there's the difference. I will never have a shot of a man with a bird in front of his face. It'll never happen.
Right.
You know, I'll never do the cutout or the room of clouds because it's cool, but he's done it, and I'm just copying if I do that. But there is one that I did that was definitely a play on one of his specific images. Now, I don't know what his meant. His image was called The Pleasure Principle, which ironically is the name of a Janet Jackson song. Go figure. It was. And here's the great thing about Rene Magritte. I had no idea that I loved him until about 3 or 4 years ago, because I had no idea who did all this stuff. But in his shot, there's a man sitting like this on at a desk, and his face is pure light. And who knows what that means? But I did one very similar where light was emanating from a man sitting at a desk. For me, I know what that meant. I don't know what he meant. but I know that that influence has been there since the beginning. Rene Magritte's images has been in magazines that I read when I was a kid. There were music videos. When music videos were popular, a lot of people were copying Rene Magritte. But I didn't know that. And I finally connected it all 3 years ago. I'm like, oh my God, this is the guy that has done all this. This is the guy that all this came from. A lot of British influence is in there too. I was obsessed with British music, and when the British New Wave period of the early 80s came about, all those visuals were very influential to a very young person at the time when I was coming up. But consequently, my songs, I had a very strict policy. It was too strict. It was too strict. But when you're very young, you try to set boundaries and parameters. You try to say, this is black, this is white. I am this, I am not this. And I told myself when I was writing songs, nothing will be about this time period. I will not mention telephones. I will not mention television. I will not mention anything that couldn't be ascribed to any century we're talking about. It has to be open-ended and no time reference. And kind of that has also followed into my visuals now. So I guess it's just kind of me transferring my sensibilities from music to art, and they're the same person. Damaged as I might be, it's the same person. So yeah, songs are a huge influence. The way a song used to make you feel, and all the images that it used to conjure up. See, there was a time period before music videos where you didn't have the visual end of it, and sometimes songs made you think about stuff and visualize things. And the video kind of took that away. It said, no, here's what it looks like. And now they're kind of gone again. And now it's open again. Like the music can be something that informs a visual. But I never listen to music when I work. I don't know why.
Really? Huh. That's interesting.
I work in utter silence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's weird.
Any bands or songs in particular that you want to mention that you think are especially inspiring?
Yeah, actually, on my Flickr page, I started collecting all of them into collections.
Okay.
This group inspired by this artist. This group inspired, and a lot of them are song titles or song lyrics that dictated the actual image. So I've done about 4 or 5 based on Kate Bush songs.
Okay.
Literally, like, I had no idea until I thought of this song and said, this image would work really well as a concept for that lyric. So there's like 4 from her. Joni Mitchell, as hippie as her name conjures up. You think of 60s and Woodstock and all this terrible hippie stuff when you think of her. She actually is one of my favorite artists. She's a brilliant lyricist, a painfully good songwriter. She's a painter. She was a photographer for a while. She did her own album covers. She's like the essence of art, and her lyrics were genius. And she retained her focus and her anger and her point of view right up to the end of her career. So I have several songs based on her. Neil Finn, who's a songwriter from New Zealand, has been a hero of mine since I was in my teens. A lot of Peter Gabriel is a huge influence on me visually as well as. So I mean, it goes on, and I've actually used my own songs for images too.
Great.
It's kind of cool because, my song can now become a piece of a visual.
Do you listen to the song first and then you sort of go out and shoot based off of what you're feeling from that song, or have you already shot all your images and then you hear the song and you sort of put your work together?
No, not at all. I'll give you an example of one of them. In the 80s, one of the biggest albums of 1983 was The Police and an album called Synchronicity.
Okay.
So 4 big hits off the album. Every Breath You Take.
That's a good one.
On Your Finger with a video.
I love that song.
Synchronicity 2 with a great video. King of Pain, no video.
Okay.
There never was a video for that song. It is one of the most beautiful lyrics that he ever wrote. It's all it is one laundry list, a list after list of metaphors of pain. You know, there's a little black spot on the sun today. There's a black hat caught in a high treetop. There's a dead flagpole and the wind won't stop. It's all these tortured images. And it's like, how could they have not have done a video for something so visual as this song? So 20 years later or whatever, I'm buying a prop, and I bought a crown. And didn't think of it, but I wanted my model. I think I was thinking of themes of the burdens of command. That was kind of the concept. What is it like to be in charge? What is it like to be in command? What is it like to be king? How lonely must that be? What's the other side of it other than power? So, it never became a concept, but here I have a model sitting in a chair, looking dead, with a crown on his head, holding a cup that's empty. And I'm like, oh, I'm shooting King of Pain. All right. So that image is called King of Pain. He's holding a staff. He's holding a cup. He's dead. It reminded me of the song, and so it all kind of connected after the fact and subconsciously, I guess, But never once have I ever thought of a song and said, I'm going to go do that. It always comes during the editing. So sad pose, dark pose, I'll throw a random background in. So I have this whole folder of fields, hills, mountains, trees, ocean, whatever. And I'll just say, I'm going to dump a field in and see what that looks like with this pose. What does it make me think of? Nothing. Okay, let's try this. And at some point, the environment and the setting and the lights and the color all start saying, oh, you're talking about this. This is what it's trying to tell you. So, not to make too long of a story of it, but the other night I finished one that I started working on about 5 days ago. It's called, what did I call it? Oh, I called it In the Lowlands, okay, which is the song title. But it started off with 3 poses from the same model, all with his back to the camera. Mm-hmm. One's looking left, one's looking right, one's looking straight on. I love back of the head because, number one, it's anti-model, because what model wants to be shot from the back that you can never see their face? But what it does for the audience is you can say that person's anybody because they have no face, they have no identity. It could be you, it could be anyone. So I had 3 of them in the shot, and one of them was close, one of them was medium, one's very distant. Well, I don't know what that means. I have no idea. I put them in Salton Sea, where I went in California earlier this year and shot some scenery. And I thought that place was amazing for scenery because it's a ghost town. It's miserable. It's sad. It's a failed dream. People's homes it's decaying. So what does it mean that these three guys are there? At first, I thought it meant the strange observers from Fringe, one of my favorite shows.
It's a good show.
Isn't it great? Yeah. I love it. So I thought it was some play on observers of Earth, something sci-fi. But it wasn't. When I put fog in, something that doesn't happen in Salton Sea very often, at all, really. When I put a foggy environment in, and these 3 guys are looking kind of just everywhere, I put a light source in the front, in front of them, but none of them are looking at it. So eventually it all kind of made sense. Like, in other words, my subconscious was telling me what the image was. It was talking about me and my point of view, my mind, my mood. Yeah. And over 5 days, it starts talking to you, and you start getting a little crazy. You're like, am I just making this up, or is this just telling me, is this like a psychological event here? Is this my therapy? I don't know what this is. But at some point, the song In the Lowlands, which is from Neil Finn and Crowded House, one of my favorite songwriters, in the lowlands. Well, Salton Sea is the lowest part of California. I think it's at sea level or below it, actually.
Wow.
So it's a low land. And that song just cycled through my head, and I'm like, well, I know what this is going to be called because there's nothing else I can call it now.
Got
And
it.
that song was about impending doom, something bad coming. And it sounded right, it looked right. So that's how that all happens. It's very backwards, but
Do you
it's
want
my
to
favorite.
try to share that picture with us? I think Google has a share function where let me see, chat. There's if you on the left side of your screen, I think there's a screen share button. It's the third icon down, and then I think you're able to like bring up pictures
Oh,
and show folks that are watching, so they get a better sense of
yeah.
which photo you're talking about. We can play around with it too, and
Third
if you're
one down is screen share, right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. So let me pull that image up.
okay.
Still very fresh. I just finished it. Um, and this is one that has about 40 layers. A lot of layers, and it keeps growing and growing. So let's see. I'll try this.
I mean, is it ready to be shared? Because I
Oh
don't.
yeah, no, it's posted. It's definitely posted already.
Okay.
I like doing that as soon as possible. I like here's the screen share of it. It's stretching it though. I think it's stretching it though, isn't it?
Not on my end. It's
No,
just.
not on your. Oh, good. Okay, so and I do a large write up for every image because in the time it takes to make them, I'm thinking about all these things of what it means, and each one has a story, whether it's evident to the viewer or not. I'm just basically sharing. It's sort of like a blog. It's like I'm sharing what was going on in my head when I made it, and it could be of no interest to some people, and other people might find it interesting. That's great. But either way, I'm writing it anyway. So you have moorings for boats that are decaying, and there's no boats. You have three men in still water, not moving, and looking rather bored. You have birds that aren't flying. You have light, but is that light retreating? Is it growing? We don't know. So there's no motion. There's no momentum. There's no way out. There's no place to go. There's nothing to look at. And that sounds like the opposite of an interesting image, but that's actually how I felt. My life is not going forward fast enough. It's it's not evolving. It's not moving in a direction. It's kind of just waiting around. Waiting for something to happen is sometimes the most painful thing to do. And so it's about being in a low place. It's about being depressed, you know? And so that's what this one was about for me.
Can you talk about some of the technical aspects of the photo? Like looks like there's a light source coming from
Yep.
the middle of the photo. So how do you match that up to the light that's falling on the characters in
Or
your
if you
photo?
like, if you like, I can close this and pull up the PSD.
Sure, that
And I
would
can
be amazing.
start doing some layers. Let me see if did I stop screen? Yes, okay.
Yeah, you stopped it. Yep.
So the PSD might take a little while to open because it gets a little big,
Okay.
and my computer's getting quite old. So it seems like if I use Photoshop for a few hours, it gets really angry and cranky, and it doesn't want to work very quickly anymore. So I'm just going to pull that up, and then I can talk about that. But basically, the biggest asset I have is the gray seamless paper. It's basically a green screen, but it's not green. And green screen's great, except that it throws green light everywhere.
Right.
You don't want green light on your models. You don't want spill that you can't control. And so the gray paper is a way of selecting the model quickly and putting a background in very quickly. But also, I never put a model on top of a background. I put everything on top of the model.
Why is that?
Because when you cut out a person's hair, it looks terrible most of the time. So this way I don't have to do that. So I can literally get down to the thinnest flyaway hair and everything will come with it.
Wow.
And let me see if it's even opening yet. Oh wow, it's taking a long time. So the gray paper, think of it as a silver screen in a movie theater. So if you stand in front of a silver screen and a movie starts playing around you,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of an image is ghosted over you and onto the screen, but it's being beamed, it's being projected. It's not solid. And so this is the approach to the compositing, is that gray paper is acting as a silver screen, and I overlay everything on top of it. So what it gives you is shadow and a blank background with some density, so everything else can be lightly applied, like an ocean, like a like a sky, like mountains, and the lines will be very smooth because I'm painting like a rye-shaped hole. I'm cutting a rye-shaped hole out of it, but it's only beams of light. It's not solid. So if I had to chisel you and your shape and cut your shape out of rock, it's going to look rough. But if I beam the rock around you and cut your hole out, you're not going to see the edges as much. And so that's something I noticed early on, and I don't know where I got the idea, but I noticed early on that cutting people out and sticking them in backgrounds doesn't look very good all the time, especially if they have long hair.
Mm-hmm.
And where do I chop it? I don't have to do that. And so I can get my basic masking done in like a minute and a half.
That
So
is really fast.
yeah, and once I cut a hole, once I make the mask, that mask is the mask for the entire thing, and I can add 30 things below you and try them out really quickly and see what it looks like very quickly. So it's all about layer masking, which was one of the last things I ever learned because it sounded like a nightmare and I didn't want to learn it. But layer masking is a great tool, and I think the PSD is up now. Let's see.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me try and screen share this again. Okay. And let me know if you see it.
Yeah. It's up.
Okay. So here's the layer palette. And I'm going to start removing stuff. And we'll see it go to various states of ugly.
For some reason the Photoshop is showing, but the layer palette is
Oh, really?
is missing. Maybe because it's not attached to.
Not attached. You're right.
Yeah.
And right now my computer's protesting this whole affair. So let me give it a little time. Let's try this again. No, it's very angry at me right now.
It's okay.
Here we go. This should do it. Come on. Get in there. Get in there. Does not want to go. Okay. Do you see it?
I see it. Yeah, it's there.
Okay. Yeah, I work with two screens, so I have everything spread out.
Got it.
I forget that screen sharing is like the one screen. Okay, so I'm going to start removing some layers and start from the bottom.
It's a lot of layers.
It is. A lot of them are muted because there were bad ideas that never came about. So there's a lot of things I try and I leave them in there just in case for future reference. I want them back again. So let's see. Let's kill everything here.
And how long does it take you to complete one of these?
This one was about 3 days.
Wow.
So with this one, normally, so if I start with a shot like this, come on, where's my birds? I have to hide those birds. They're not supposed to be here right now. Okay, here they are. I'm really bad at my labeling. Okay, so let me get rid of everything except this guy. Okay, so here's what the layer looked like originally. Now, you'll see some weird stuff going on here. Because I shoot with gray paper, I have the ability to put him in the frame and stretch the paper out in any direction. In other words, if the paper's not wide enough or high enough, as long as I have something to grab, I can stretch it out. Now, this looks terrible, but really the gray is only there to serve as reference, as for me to cut him out. And so if I wanted to cut him out quickly, I'm literally just using my magic wand and setting the tolerance to about 7 or so. And I do a rough mask like this and just grab everything that I can as much as possible. And I'll just make this quicker. Let's see. So this is like, we're talking about a minute or less.
Okay.
And it's all because of the gray paper and lighting the gray paper and lighting the model as separately as possible. So there's plenty of light on him, and there's plenty of light on the gray paper that was there. And it's enough that, assuming you don't put him in gray clothing, there's plenty of difference for the computer to figure out the lines and the separation. Now, if he has gray hair the same color and I don't light it, that's going to be a problem. So it's one of the reasons I stay away from people with long hair. Like, well, dark hair and short hair would be even better. But I try not to limit it that way. If I see someone with long blonde hair that looks like Thor, I'm going to have to go for it. But so there's my mask. And once I do this, here, I'll just throw this as a duplicate layer. And I'll delete the one that's there. So now once I have this selection made, now I have that shape, and everything else goes around that shape. So I can add the ocean over him, and as long as I cut out him, I'm going to erase all the masks that were there. Okay, so here is, let me get rid of all this stuff. Okay, so here's my picture of Salton Sea. And I deleted the sky before I brought this layer in. Or actually, I didn't. I grayed it out. Here's what it looks like normally. Okay, so once I have that shape of him cut out, all I have to do is just copy that layer, that mask, somewhere else, and then he's there. Now, you can see these lines aren't perfect around his edge. There's plenty of ways of refining this mask, but one of the easiest ways of making it less noticeable is changing the blend mode of that ocean scene to something like hard light or overlay. And then you can refine the mask further by just refining the mask and pushing all the edges inward.
Okay.
And smoothing it out. And some of this requires painting. Sometimes I do a rough mask and say, well, those lines don't look good. I'm going to have to go in very slowly with a Wacom tablet and paint them out and make the edges better. Depends on luck of the draw, the lighting versus the model versus the colors versus all kinds of stuff. But once that mask is made, everything else is based around it. So you can say, I want things on top of him, behind him, beneath him. So it's a little better, and it's a process. And once I have an environment in, I can throw any environment in I want and say, let me try a field. Let me try And so the background paper, as you can see, there's some light areas and dark areas, and because I stretched it, it doesn't look very good. So one of the things I do in that case is I put a gray solid, as you can see here. I put a gray solid underneath the model, and in this case, I reverse the mask and cut everything except the model out. So I'm basically popping him in, and that's not something I like to do a lot. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the gray around his hairline because that's the most problematic area. And I'm coloring a solid of that exact color and then cutting him out and putting him on top of the gray solid. So that basically gives me a very neutral background. Now, I don't always want that. Sometimes I want the light that was originally on the paper to be exactly how it was shot. And I can pull up something really quickly that'll give you an example of that. So this one recently is almost verbatim what was on the paper and what was the original lighting, and I didn't do this technique of cutting him out and putting him on a neutral solid. So here we go. This is another new one. Okay, so that lighting,
Oh, wow.
except for the floor, which was an addition, and some texture on the walls, and of course the tattoos, that's all the original lighting. So that's that beauty dish I was telling you about. So
Okay.
that's one single light. I got a little bit of a fill in the background, and all of it was on him, and it cast a nice, lovely shadow on the floor. And so all I did is add a floor texture and some overall texture in the tattoos, and that's all that one needed. So that's gray paper with texture overlays. That's really all it is.
That's amazing.
So it's, it's just, and I have some tutorials online, like on YouTube, on some basic compositing stuff. All the light stuff, like the sun, it's all just white paint. I make a round solid, blur it, blend it, duplicate it, blur it again, and once I create like a sun system where I have 8 layers that make up a nice glowing sun. Well, if I ever need a sun again, I'm going to open that PSD and use it again because it was too hard to make the first time. So now that I have one, I'm going to use it as many times as I want. And in fact, I find that's a good way to start a new one. Is I have no ideas, so I'm going to use the environment of this other photo and put that all over a new shot of a model and see if that gives me any new ideas. And then I'll change the colors, and then I'll get rid of the mountains, and then it's kind of like borrowing leftovers and then changing the leftovers. Like, I don't want macaroni and cheese again. What else can I do with it? Let me add some hamburger to it or something, to change it up.
So if you put a sun, like in that previous picture, you put the light source in the middle, and it looked like your model was lit from his right side. So
yes,
that means you would necessarily have to put that model to the left of that light source, so it looks like the light is hitting him. Is that how you...
It's a good question. It's a great question, and it's something that comes up once in a while. It makes no sense for the sun to be there. Logically speaking, if a sun was there, to expose it that way in a camera, all my men would be nothing but silhouettes. Nothing but silhouettes, because the sun is going to be more powerful than anything else. So that's where suspension of disbelief comes in. Now, it doesn't mean that you can cheat all the time. It doesn't mean that you can say, my model's lit on the left, but I really want my light source to be visible in the shot on the right. That makes no sense, and that's probably pushing it too far. But let me remind you of a film. I don't know if you've seen it. It came out about 1.5 years ago. It was called Cloud Atlas.
I've seen that, yeah.
Okay, so there's a beautiful scene set in the 70s of Halle Berry and Tom Hanks meeting for the first time in that time period. And they're on this beautiful porch with a nice sunset going down over a nuclear power plant or something like that. Everything's beautiful amber and orange. The sun is right between them. And yet they're both lit from the side. And you can see them. Now, so in film, you have to cheat light. You have to suspend disbelief a little bit. Every time they shoot nighttime scenes in a movie, it's a blue filter. Well, moonlight isn't blue, but we all accept that as that's nighttime. So, you know, we have to cheat occasionally. I try not to do it too often, but if I want a damn sun there, I'm going to put it there no matter what. And my models were lit from both sides, so they both had. I mean, it's the same model, but it's 3 different poses, and he didn't move position, so I had almost equal light on both sides of him. So in my mind, he's lit from other things. I don't know where the light source is coming from. But you know what? I don't know where the light source is coming from in a film like Cloud Atlas when they're having a beautiful sunset talk and they're lit from the left and the right. Where's that coming from? I don't know. But it doesn't matter. You know, it's a cheat, but it's something that's cinematography dictates it's okay sometimes. But that doesn't mean that you should have the light coming from the left and a visible light coming from the right. It just doesn't make any sense. You have to kind of play logically, but then cheat a little bit.
Got it. No, that's great.
And you expose an inconsistency, but it's one that I'm okay with.
Do you have any words of wisdom or advice for beginning artists that you wish somebody gave you when you first started? Or
you know, it sounds terribly cynical, but when I first started writing songs in my very early teens and 20s, I wanted to be the deepest person in the world, and I wasn't. And it's okay that you're not. Not everyone's going to be deep coming out of the womb. And it's okay to try, but I think what I'm trying to say is you have to stay relevant and true to your actual experience. If I'm trying to write a political discourse on my philosophy of society under the influence of Catholicism or something like that, and I'm 20 years old, it's tough because I don't have enough time on the planet or perspective to do it. So for me to write about old age, like elderly, I'm imagining a lot because I'm not there yet. Getting close, but I'm not there yet. I can write about my 20s because I lived them. I can write about my 30s because I lived them. Anything else is conjecture. I don't know for sure. And I guess when I was writing songs that were beyond my scope of knowledge, when I read them now, they're embarrassing to me. And I think it's because it's okay to reach far, but know that it's probably better to figure out exactly who you are and not who you wish to be. And that translates to art too. It's like I might want to when I wanted to be a songwriter, I wanted to write songs like this person. But I realized when I wrote songs, they don't sound like this person, and I guess to get very frustrated by that. Why are they coming out almost country-like when I hate country music? Why aren't they sounding ethereal and transcendent like this guy? Well, because that's not who I am, I guess. And you can make yourself into somebody else. You can wish for these qualities, but if it's not really in you, then it's just a wish. So it's important to get comfortable and very, very knowledgeable about who you are. And that'll all fall right into place with your art. Keep it personal. I mean, when I write a lot, I do a lot of imagery based on religious experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm coming from my point of view. So I'm an atheist who has a Catholic background. I went to Catholic school all my life. So I know the Bible. I know all the imagery in it. And so I use it from my point of view. And but if I was writing about the Torah or the Talmud, I don't know that. So then I'm preaching. So the difference between a broad topic like religion, keep it from your point of view and your experience, and not what you think the world should be, how you think the world should be. There's nothing worse than preaching. Teachers that preach, terrible. You're not going to listen, because in your early 20s, you're not supposed to listen. You're supposed to know everything. You're supposed to think you know everything. It's true. And yes, it would be lovely if some younger people had humility, but you're not supposed to, really. You're exactly what you're supposed to be if you think you know everything. Because in many ways, you do know more, because you're in the current.
Yeah.
Get older, you fall out of the current a little bit, and you're like, I'm watching people on the current now, and that's a different point of view. And some of it might be jealousy, some of it might be insecurity, but you're in a moment, and at some point you're not going to be in that moment. But it's okay to be in that moment. And so it's okay to be arrogant. It's okay to be confident. But you just have to always know who you are and not who you think you should be. Ophelia thing, we'll go back to that. The Ophelia imagery. What does it mean to you? Does that have any relevance to you? Does that have any experiential reference to what you've been through? And if it doesn't, then why are you doing it? Like, I'm sure you've seen, and you might have done some, and I have too, the floating person, the levitation shot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a neat trick. It's cool. I love trick photography. I do. I love special effects. But everyone's doing it. And most of the people I see doing it, no one has any point to it. Why are they floating? What does it mean?
Right.
Is there any context to it? Now, I did one about a year and a half ago, and I did it deliberately. It's a levitation shot. And I said, I'm going to do one, but there's going to be a point to it. There's going to be a reference to it. There's going to be a reason why that person's floating. And I see that happening too often, where there's a cool idea with no personal context. So if you feel like Ophelia, defeated by mankind, deceived by men, and a victim of sexism, and you drown yourself, if you feel like that person, go for it. But if you don't, why are you doing it? If you're floating in front of the moon, there might be a reason for it. And I think the difference between someone who does it with a reason and does the exact same image without a reason, I think the one with the reason is going to be better. Even if the other person, if I don't know why you're doing it, that doesn't matter. But I think that there's something that happens in art where if the person meant it, and if the person really believes it, you'll feel it more than see it.
You think it could be something that's lost in translation? Maybe it means something to that person, but the person viewing it maybe doesn't know what the context is.
Absolutely. I mean, there are people, I work with somebody that's a photographer that hates fine art photography. So he's already predisposed to not like it. He already thinks it's nonsense. He already thinks that there's no point to it. So what is he going to get out of it? Nothing. So maybe I'm just sick of Ophelia, and maybe I'm cut off from feeling the emotion of the person putting it in there. Maybe I am. I think it's possible that there is a disconnect. And one of the things that I've gotten comments about is I write long forwards to each image.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say you should let your images stand on their own. And I agree with that. And I'm not explaining them because I think they need explaining. But it became sort of a ritual for me where an image is done. It took me 5 days. It became a bit of a mini event in my life. So I'm going to write about it, because if someone chooses to read it, maybe it'll be a richer experience for them. Maybe they don't want to read it, and that's fine. Imagine what you want. I would love for someone to ideally look at it, get something out of it, think what they think it means, then read it to see if it's similar. And if it's not similar, then that's even better, because that means that this image could mean something to one person and totally something else to another person. Um, I searched online once. Once in a while I look to see if I'm being pirated too much, because that's not good and I don't want to be pirated. And I found a website called allpoetry.com. And it's basically like a Flickr for poets.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing a Michael Bilotta contest, which I thought was hysterical. But they were using my songs, my image titles and my images as inspirations for poetry writing. So I thought that was so cool. And one of the images I considered an optimistic image. And this guy took great exception. He said, "This is the most pessimistic, negative image I've ever seen." I'm like, wow, that's completely the opposite of what I think it means. So beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Everything's open to interpretation. But if I think you mean it, and that's only my point of view, if I think you mean it, I'm gonna like it more. It's like you're getting a sense of the person through their art. And it's just like when you meet someone in life, you either like them or you don't.
Yeah.
It's painful when they don't like you.
Okay. So what are your future goals, or what are your plans? Any upcoming shows or ways we can, link to you?
Well, I have a blog on my website, which, most of the photos have blog entries attached to them, but I also write aside from that. And every year for 3 years, I'm doing two things annually. I do my year in review, where it's sort of me talking about my year, the ups and downs of the art part of it. So that's out now.
Mm-hmm.
And my other favorite thing to write about is the ones that got away, where they're terrible images. I never posted them. They're like, what was I thinking? This one's an utter failure. And I think it's good because you spend as much time on those as you do the successful ones. And for whatever reason, they're terrible and they don't work. But you feel bad for them because they're just sitting there, and you're like, well, they should have their little day. So I'm looking forward to that one. There's one from last year that I never posted, and I didn't even put it in my one that got away blog, because let's just say the working title was Chicken Man, and I have no idea what I was thinking, and no one should ever see that one. But so that one's coming soon. I also have some very big ideas for shoots. Now, I said earlier that I don't believe in having ideas ahead of time, but there were two ideas that I can't get rid of that I'm not sure how I'm going to execute them, and I don't know if they're ever going to work, but I still want to try them. And they involve costumes. They involve a lot of people. I've been working with one model at a time for years now, and I'm getting bored of that. So I want to experiment with more than one model at a time. Something as simple as that can make things completely fresh. In terms of shows, I feel pretty strongly that I can teach some techniques to help this kind of art if this is something of interest to people.
Mm-hmm.
Having been through a couple of workshops myself, I feel like I can do a decent job of showing this method. So there's a photography end of it, and there's a modeling end of it, and then there's the post-production end of it. And I think my method gives the artist a lot of freedom quickly. So it's sort of like doing a painting. And imagine if a painter could erase the background and change the background into anything he wants and keep the figure in the front. So in a way, it's better than painting because you're approaching it like painting, but you can quickly interchange with technology and you can quickly get another version of it done quickly. So it's sort of like here's a way of getting to the creativity quicker. Get the technology down, figure out a methodology to allow you maximum time to create. Don't waste your time worrying about how to fix something. Fix it later. Come up with the idea later. And this way, this gives you all the freedom you want to try. It's like pasting things on a board. You could say, no, this color doesn't go with this. I think I'll take it down. If I shot this in nature, I wouldn't be able to do that. Having said that, if I lived in California, I'd probably want to be outside a lot more than I do.
Right.
But you guys don't have the great skies that we have here. The dark, moody, black, brown.
Yeah, we don't have clouds. It's usually just a monocolor, clear sky. So it's really not much to work with.
Yeah, unless you're in Northern California and had some fog to play with, and
right.
But I think the trade-off is better, definitely in your advantage, because you have nice weather most of the year.
Yeah, it's great. So tell our viewers where they can find you, your URL or Facebook, Twitter handles.
Yeah, so my name, michaelbilotta.com, is my website. Everything is on there. But I also realize that nobody goes to websites anymore, and they're mostly going to social media. So Michael Bilotta Photography on Facebook. That has some unique content unto itself. I think my before and after series is there, where I post the before shot and the after shot side by side. I'm on onex.com. Onex.com is a curated website. And for me, it was my first experience with being rejected. Because you don't just post photos there, you submit them, and they either get posted and published or rejected. So it was a good training ground for getting some humility, because most of it got rejected at first. So that's a place to go to see some great work from other people and very high resolution versions of my stuff too. And everything in my catalog is all on Flickr. Flickr is my longest running site that I was ever on, so I still post everything there first. So Flickr will always have a special place in my heart, and it's just Michael Bilotta Photography there too. So that's it for now. I'm on YouTube. I don't have a lot of tutorial videos. I have a few, and I think that's also YouTube/Michael Bilotta Photography possibly as well. And I do Photoshop tutoring one-on-one through Skype sessions and screen sharing. So I'll run with a lecture for an hour, or have you stop and ask questions, and then I'll watch you do the same thing. And I have like a training image that I use, and we build it together. So there's that for now.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it was awesome.
I think I'm going to end the recording here.
Thank you for tuning in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or check out the website at makephotoart.com.